Dr. Stephen Whitehead. I'm living in Thailand and I've spent 25 years working and living in Leeds. So I know the city very well. I'm very, very familiar with it. So it's going to be a nostalgic trip back for me. I haven't been in the UK for 10 years.
Wow, yeah, it's a long time. So Leeds will have changed quite a lot since you've been here, right?
Yeah, the last time I was there was a sad time. I was there in 2015 for my first wife's funeral. She lived and passed away in Horsforth, and my son was born in Leeds, and another son was born in Wakefield. So I've got strong connections with Yorkshire. My family come from Pateley Bridge originally, many, many years ago. So I've got a lot of Yorkshire blood in me. But Leeds, I love the city. I guess it's changed, so I'm going to be interested to see it when I'm walking around Leeds in October, see how it has changed, yeah.
Okay, so your work, I mean, in many ways, it is around one of the most controversial topics of our time, certainly of recent times. But if we could talk about masculinity in particular, and the title of the panel that you're on, which is Where Have All the Good Men Gone? I mean, they are still here, aren't they, somewhere?
I've gone through this question in my mind, obviously, since I knew I was coming on the festival. I mean, I guess there's more good men around today than there's ever been, because we've got more men who are aligned with feminism. We've got more men who are okay with women's newfound independence. But at the same time, we've got a clear polarization between those types of men and the men who are finding it very, very difficult to come to terms with women's newfound assertiveness and independence. It's not really about feminism so much. The majority of women are not feminists, but the majority of women do have an independent femininity. And that is the difficulty that many men have, men who are rooted in traditional types of masculinity, coming to terms with the idea that women actually are not going to play second fiddle to them in the way that they did historically. And so I think there's more good men around, but there's also this polarization, and there's a lot of men who are struggling and a lot of men who are acting violently against women's independence and freedom of expression.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard this idea of toxic masculinity, if you like, being a backlash against that. And you do. Can we talk about masculinity, because you don't tend to hear it without the word toxic in front of it these days. I mean, indeed, it's one of your books. Do you think people now consider masculine traits, or any of them, as positive at the moment?
I would hope they do, because one of the problems is that we hear a lot about toxic masculinity, and that's a legitimate term. It actually comes from a term called hegemonic masculinity. 35, 40 years ago, sociologists like me were writing about hegemonic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is just a mainstream term for what is a sociological term, like hegemonic masculinity. So we hear a lot about it, but it's not that. What the problem is that young men in particular will think, oh, I'm masculine, I'm toxic, and it's not like that at all. There's actually many ways of expressing yourself as a man. In fact, all manliness is a form of performance, if you like. Not all those performances are dangerous or toxic or hegemonic or disadvantageous to men and women. There are positive expressions of positive types of masculinity. So there's not one type of masculinity, there's multiple types of masculinity. In fact, every man has his own particular individual expression of masculine self. But there are patterns, and the biggest patterns you can see are a positive, liberal, pro-woman, pro-LGBT, anti-racist masculinity against a more negative, illiberal, almost what I call a male fundamentalism, and we're seeing that emerge around the world now, which is very much against women's empowerment. But that's not new. We have to recognize this has been going on for centuries. What is new is there's now a big discussion about masculinities. And it's important to use the plural. There's more than one masculinity. There's a big discussion about masculinities, which there never was in the past. So when I was doing my research and PhD on masculinities back in the early 1990s, I was one of a handful of scholars in the world. There weren't many. Now, it's mainstream news. I do a gender alert for toxic masculinity. I'm getting stuff every day. It's all over. Every single country is discussing this topic. And that's the big change. In the past, men were invisible as a masculine subject. They're no longer invisible. And that's been a big shock to a lot of men, that they're now being questioned, having to answer questions about their behavior towards women, LGBT people, etc. And that's the big difference. And a lot of men don't like it.
Okay. If toxic masculinity, or those the other phrase that you used that has immediately gone out of my hegemonic, was that
Hegemonic,
close?
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
excellent. If it is a virus, what are the most effective vaccines that we have, if you like?
Education. Yeah, I could say parenting, but to be honest, I think parenting today is not for the faint-hearted. It's a heavy-duty operation for any parent, certainly a parent of young males. So I think it's got to be the education system, and there are optimistic signs there. A friend of mine, Professor Becky Francis, is heading the government, the UK English curriculum changes, and she's having to bring in a curriculum which will incorporate education on gender identity, LGBT identities, masculinities. Becky knows this very well. We've been friends for many, many years. I remember way back when she was a lecturer at Greenwich University, when I was starting at the same time. So Becky understands this very well, and she's in charge. She's been commissioned by the government to create a new curriculum, English curriculum. Now, it's not just about gender and identity. There's going to be a host of other stuff in as well, but it's got to come through education. So if there's going to be an intervention that's going to make a change in these young men's lives, boys' lives, it's going to be through education. However, we also have to educate the parents. So I would like to see more organised education of parents around the UK at the same time, because parents are struggling, no question about that.
And I guess there has to be some framework for creating these positive views of masculinity, or perhaps looking at those types of masculinity that are positive, because I think there's a lot of things tied in with men's well-being, of course, and we know that men under 50 are killing themselves in really alarming numbers.
Yeah.
And I've been to events about that where they've talked about, men, they want to be useful, but they're told actually, well, that's mansplaining, or that, they want to be successful, they're ambitious, but they're told that that's sort of a toxic trait as well. So how do we talk about these, what could be positive traits, in a positive way, without men feeling like they're no longer useful or wanted in the world in the numbers that they are?
Big thing here is for these men who want to be useful to not to feel that there's a sense of entitlement because they're male or because they have a penis. That is the problem. If they think that because they're born male that they've got an entitlement to superiority over women, or to be successful, or to occupy managerial positions, or to be in leaders of countries or governments or armed forces, that is the problem. And we've got to get men away from this idea that they somehow automatically anymore earn the right by virtue of their gender or sexuality. And we're talking about cisgender men here. I want to make that clear. I'm not talking about gay men. I'm talking about cisgender men, because that's the focus of the concern. We've got to get these men to understand, yes, they should not be dissuaded from wanting to be successful or achieve, but they've got to recognize that they are no longer a privileged gender, and they've got to accept that. The women are outperforming them in every level of education, from kindergarten through to PhD. Women are coming into areas of work that men have long held sway, dominance, and they've got to accept that. And I think that there's ways of being a man which can be compassionate, empathetic, loving, understanding, but they've got to develop their emotional intelligence and put that first, rather than this craving for success and dominance and power over other people. If I was to broaden the question out, we've got to look at where we are in the state of the world today, and the fact that 200,000 years of human civilization, most of that time has been dominated by men. Men have led us to where we are today. I mean, okay, that's been a bit harsh, but it's a fact. Whether we look at the environment, global warming, the economic situation, wars, violence, terrorism, wherever you look, crime, men are the architects, instruments, and instigators of these, and we've got to remove that. So this is a hard lesson for many men to learn, but many men learnt it. I learnt it, and my sons, I've got 3 sons, they've learnt it. It's not that big a challenge. What it means is these men have got to get away from the idea that somehow they're entitled to women wanting them or needing them in the same. Women don't even need men now, and I'll say this in my book, and this is the big danger. Is my book is titled "The End of Sex," and I think what we're going to see in the next few years is AI coming in, and I see more women going into AI relationships than into heterosexual relationships. That's going to be the trend, and it's not being talked about much, but it's going to come. It's already started.
Could I just ask why it was that you wanted to get involved with the festival?
I was really privileged to be asked. I mean, the Leeds International Festival of Ideas, I've heard about it, I've known about it, I've never attended before because I've been in Thailand. So for me, it's a great privilege, and I think it's marvellous at what you're doing. Leeds has always been a vibrant city. It's always been up at the forefront. I think for me, it's always been the best city in the UK. I much preferred it to where I was. I was born in Southport near Liverpool, and I've always been a Liverpool football supporter, but Leeds has got something special. So I think it's wonderful that Leeds are doing it. For me, it's an opportunity to talk about something that I've been involved in for 30 years, and I'll be delighted to come back and speak to people in Leeds. A lot of my friends are going to be there. People I know, so I think what we've got with this festival, and it's very provocative, interesting, stimulating themes. It's an opportunity for ordinary people to come together and really explore some fascinating topics which are relevant to them in their everyday lives right now.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. And you answered my final question, which was why it was important to have these conversations in a room and not just on X, where
absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah.
Absolutely.